Hi everyone, welcome back to another episode of Enablement Evolved. Here with me today is my co-host Kieran Smith from Mandela and Aaron Evans from Flowstate.
Yeah, thanks for jumping on, Aaron. I'm really looking forward to this for a number of different reasons. You and I seem to have very similar thought processes on things, or we shall find out if we have very similar thought processes on things. But obviously, lots of people know you from your content on LinkedIn. You've got a very good YouTube channel as well. I would also go so far as to call you the thinking man's enablement person, in terms of you don't subscribe to the sort of normal, or not all of the normal things. So I'm looking forward to this conversation. But what I suppose best place to start is hand it over to you. You're obviously one of the co-founders over at Flowstate, so probably the best place to start is letting people know a little bit more about yourself and about Flowstate.
Yeah, sure. Thank you for that warm introduction. I really appreciate it, and that's very lovely of you to say. So yeah, there's probably two things. So I'll talk a moment or two about my organisation and what we do. But actually, I think probably the more interesting thing for your listeners is my journey into enablement, right? So I was really fortunate. I've been doing this for almost 15 years now. So since before it was called enablement, and we were called like training or L&D, which is a bit of a dirty word, right? So yeah, I worked for a big, huge multinational corporate at the very beginning of my career, which was like an oil tanker that took like a lifetime to move, and loads of initiatives for change, which was super exciting. And after a really short period of time of selling, I started training. And then they sent me over to Australia, and I did the enablement over there and set up the enablement for the company I was working for. And then since then, I've been bouncing around with sort of small SaaS businesses, digital marketplaces, scale-ups, fast growth organizations, pre-IPO, post-IPO organizations, embedding and running their enablement, which has been a super interesting journey because I've managed to kind of taste everything on the menu when it comes to the types of businesses that I've worked for. And I do have very developed views on enablement. You're absolutely right. And we'll probably approach those as we continue to talk. To the point where I actually started my own organization, which is Flowstate, with my co-founder, Rafael Fernandez, who you may have seen his content as well on LinkedIn. And we're kind of dedicated to bring sales excellence to organizations through their sales and their enablement. So we work with businesses to either create their enablement roadmap, accelerate their enablement roadmap, or give them extra capacity and expertise on making sure that that roadmap is fit for purpose, essentially. And as we'll talk about later, not all enablement roadmaps are fit for purpose. And we're seeing the chickens come home to roost for that in 2023. So yeah, super excited to be here with you guys, and interested to hear what questions you've got.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for that background. I also love your analogy of tried a bit of everything on the menu, which kind of leads me into my next point, which is, so if we're talking about coaching is the topic of today's discussion. So if we start from the beginning, in your opinion, where do the best coaches come from? Just because someone's a top performing IC, does that mean they'll make a good coach? Or if they come from a specific industry?
Yeah, it's a really good question. Look, I'm sort of deeply passionate about coaching. The reason I am is because I'm aware how brilliant it is as an organizational capacity when you get it right, and actually how it can affect so much brilliant outcome for businesses. More specifically to your question, the answer is I don't know, is the honest answer, but I know where bad coaches come from. And actually, I look within the individual as opposed to their background and where they've come from. Or even their job function, to be perfectly honest with you, because some of the best coaches are salespeople, because selling is a lot like coaching. When you look at the Venn diagram, it's very much about guided discovery, helping people come up with the answers themselves, guiding them to an outcome, follow-up, feedback, revisiting, etc., etc. But what I look for really is the kind of deep intrinsic motivator of the person that I'm coaching or I'm developing into a coach. Is probably more relevant. And they've got to be motivated by curiosity and helping. That's fundamentally it, right? If you're not motivated by curiosity and you're not motivated by helping, coaching is a very lonely place, and it's arduous and it's a task. And you can kind of draw a line down management organizations, those that are motivated by it and those that aren't motivated by it. Because when you think about what coaching really is, it's enabling potential in people for them to go and do something. That's what it is. So you've got to take real pleasure in that process of enabling someone, because it's arduous, it's long, it's sometimes quite clumsy, it's sometimes quite boring, to be honest with you. And you've got to be motivated for the end result of helping them come up with an answer or to access a resource to the answer. And the second part of it is seeing how they've done once they've been coached, so getting back together and saying, well, how did it go, right? So if you're not motivated by helping, you're not driven by curiosity, what's the point? You're not going to make a good coach. You're going to get frustrated with it. And what I find is when pressure's on, and the targets are bearing down, it's the first thing to go. Whether you're in enablement, whether you're a sales manager, or whether you're in selling, it's the first thing to go. You cut best practice and you just jump to the outcome straight away.
Yeah, I love that. There was one thing in particular that stood out to me there, and it goes back to the fundamentals of coaching. And it was the part that you said about coaching is about unlocking someone's potential. And I have this, I'm screaming into a pillow at this stage, that when I talk to people about the difference between feedback and coaching, because they are interchangeable. They're both really important in personal development. But in my experience, and I wanted to get your thoughts, is like every company talks about having a coaching culture, right? That's a buzzword. It's up there with, you know, the beer taps and the ping pong table. We have a coaching or development culture, right? But realistically, do most businesses actually have a feedback culture as opposed to a coaching culture, do you think?
Yeah, and one of the things we painstakingly do when we go into an organization is that we force them to disentangle and discern the difference between coaching, training, feedback, because they're all mechanisms that you can use, but they actually serve very different purposes and actually drive very different outcomes as well, right? To your point more broadly, I think I kind of wince when I hear the term coaching culture. And you alluded to this, because you don't create coaching cultures. You use coaching as the language, if that makes sense. So I often say this, and people are like, well, what on earth are you talking about? But look, hypothetically, if I was speaking to you in Spanish, what's that got to do with culture? What culture would you assume I have if I was speaking to you in Spanish? It's a genuine question.
Not Scottish anyway. We can only speak one language.
But look at that question, right? And so many people will turn around and go, oh, maybe you nap in the afternoon, or maybe you eat tapas, as an example, and they're really great examples. But then I say, well, what if I'm from Argentina and not Spain? Like, it's got nothing to do with culture and everything to do with language, right? So you may have a culture within your business where you run pipe reviews. It's like, great, that's a cultural thing, right? There is a culture where this is part of your cadence. But what language are you using in those pipe reviews? If it's just feedback all the time, then it's not the right language. The language you should be using is coaching, right? So again, one of the things that we painstakingly go through when we're going to businesses is that we're trying to convince businesses that actually, whenever you're having these interactions and these touch points, forget about culture, think about language. Can you use the language of culture in that interaction? If someone comes to your desk and asks you a question, are you using it as a coaching opportunity? If someone is sitting in a pipe review, using it as a coaching opportunity? If you're working with a poor performer, like, it's the optimum time to use coaching as the language that you speak. Now, to the point you made before, and I really like the point you're making about distinguishing the difference. When you look at something like the Miles Downey coaching spectrum with like non-directive and directive. Now, obviously, there's a time and a place for both, but it's about discerning and picking the right one to use. And what we typically find is that the more you spend with someone, the more you move into a kind of non-directive style, which is where coaching ultimately sits. So if you first start working for me in my business, I probably need to be more directive, because I'm transacting knowledge, transacting information, and stuff that you simply don't know. It's an unconscious incompetence at that stage. But the more you work with someone, it should move further up into that non-directive, where someone comes to you and asks you a question, you say, what do you think? And they go, this, and this, and you go, okay, cool. And then they've come up with the answer themselves. But yeah, I think it's so important for us as a starting point to actually define what each of those things mean, because as soon as you've done that, you now know what tool to use, if that makes sense.
So when you're initially setting up a coaching program, or maybe looking to rebuild it from the ground up, if you're joining an organization that is looking to shake things up, would you prioritize building the program with moving from directive to non-directive at the forefront of your mind, or would you have coaching culture first?
Well, it's probably slightly more complex than that, and you've got to take into account the different component parts. But one of the things we're looking at is who's actually coaching, and then we look at. Sorry, that was my Slack. Let me start again. Right, let me turn my Slack off because it's fucking irritating. Yeah, I mean, it's probably slightly more complex than that. So I think we look at several things, right? So first of all, who's going to be doing the coaching, right? Which is really important. And then we look at, are they capable of coaching? So do they have the competency and the skill? So we test on that to see if they've got it. And then we educate them on what coaching is, but more importantly, what it isn't, because most of the time there's a conflation, as we say, of those different things. And then we go through the process of actually upskilling the people who will be coaching on coaching, right? So then we say, right, we'll then certify them and say, well, you now have the skill. You've demonstrated in a live coaching environment that you have the skill. And then we go and build a coaching cadence, which is, well, what are the opportunities during the course of a week to coach? Yeah, so let's maximize those opportunities to coach. But one of the things we do, which is helping them turn the light switch on for themselves, is we have to tell them why coaching is so powerful. Because a lot of times businesses coach for coach's sake and they don't know why they're doing it. It's the kind of deeper understanding of the value that it gives. And when you start, breaking that down, like as a statistic, every dollar spent on coaching has a $7.90 return on investment. I mean, a casino wouldn't give you those odds, right? The types of outcomes that coaching can drive, the statistics around stickiness of people within the business, not only when they're being coached, but when we coach as well. We build deeper bonds with the people that we're working with. The self-orientation goes lower, so people care less about themselves and they care more about the business, the outcome, the team, the customer, God forbid, right? All of these things start happening. So for us, that's a really important piece of the puzzle, is educating them on the power of coaching, because more often than not, businesses sort of click their fingers one day and go, oh, everyone's talking about coaching, we should coach. Ready? We've got a coaching culture. Okay, and coach. It's like, no. You can't do that, right? You just can't do that. So there's a very meticulous and well thought out process of taking people on that journey of the power of coaching, upskilling them on coaching, helping them pick the right moments to coach, and helping them be patient with coaching as well. Because if you're asking someone to go and coach, it's a bit like interviewing. There was a study that came out some time ago now, over 10 years ago, where the sixth interview is always the best interview that people do. It's not because the candidates are getting better, it's because the interview is getting better, right? It's like same with coaching. The more you coach, the better you get at it, but you've got to be patient with it, and you've got to make mistakes, and you've got to have that discomfort that happens in a coaching conversation when you first start, where the rep's like, why are you asking me so many questions? Or just tell me the answer. You've got to help them realize that discomfort is okay, and they'll get better at it. So yeah, it's a complicated beast, and it isn't a switch that you just flick and then everyone's coaching now. But one last thing I'll say about this, because it's really interesting. There's very few things I've ever seen in my career where you create a language osmotically, right? So, there's this tales of people being caught smuggling drugs into Indonesia, and they get chucked into an Indonesian jail. They're always Australian for some reason. And not that all Australians are drug dealers, obviously.
Managed to do Spanish and Australian. How many other nations are we going to go?
Quickest way of cancelling your website, your is that after 3 months, they're pretty good at speaking Indonesian without having a lesson in Indonesian, because they just automatically take the language on. It's one of the few places where I've seen reps who've had no formal coaching, but because they've been coached so well, they start using coaching as a language. So someone will come to them and go like, where'd you keep your paper for your printer? And they'll be like, well, where do you think? And they're like, oh, so they're using it as the language now, because you've created a communication muscle within them that they just now do naturally and innately, which is so cool. Not innately, sorry. They now do naturally.
Yeah, there's a few things you've mentioned there, and one of the first things that stuck out there was, like in that first part of the coaching journey, right? When you first start doing it, and you mentioned you're asking lots of questions. I think one of the things I found that with my life previously was a sales leader, and my thing was to go in and help turn teams around. A huge part of that is obviously like process, methodology, and coaching, right? That's the three levers you've kind of got when you go in as a sales leader. And one of the things I found really worked for me was setting that expectation around coaching, around questions, and be like, look, for the first sort of 30 to 60 days, I'm going to be asking you an awful lot of questions, not because I'm trying to catch you out, because I'm trying to understand. I'm trying to peel back the onion, which is the really cool phrase that kids use nowadays. But I'm really trying to understand what's happening. So don't take it like that. But if you ever feel like I'm asking you too many questions, like, let me know. And I found that works in coaching as well, and just like setting that bar. But then, like almost by osmosis, does it then sort of the balance address itself anyway? Because you don't need to ask so many questions, but then they start asking you questions as well.
Yeah.
And then the other bit that you mentioned, which I think was it was like a word that jumped out to me, and it's almost a bit of a comical joke, which was the bond, right? So quite frequently, whether it's a sales coach, whether it's quite a lot in enablement, we hear it. It's all around like are we a reps therapist? Are we a coach? At what point do you draw the line with coaching? Like, where are the boundaries? Like, if you were to like sum up that relationship in terms of the coaching, because ideally we're coaching the person, personal, professional, all these things. Do you think being like at what point do you stop becoming a coach and start becoming a therapist, and how do you make sure that you don't cross that line?
It's a good question. It's a tricky question as well, because we have to appreciate that so much performance is again, it's like linked to not only what people do 9 to 5. It's not like you come into work and you flick a switch and you're in business mode now, right? Is that there are kind of peripheral and sometimes interconnected challenges that fall outside of work that affect performance as well. Now, you know, there's probably HR guidelines across the globe of different businesses and where that line falls. But I guess for me, the kind of underlying, I suppose you'd say, sort of central thread is about performance. So if you're not coaching to performance, you're kind of wasting time. So that's my rule, is that you have to coach to performance. Now, if there's stuff in there that's getting in the way of performance, then I do think you should focus on it. You have a responsibility to the person that you're coaching to help them achieve performance, right? Or actually not help them, that's probably not the right word. It's to enable them to reach performance. But again, I think the thing I've always got front of mind is performance. And that context of performance is basically outcome and wins, right? Winning. Now, winning isn't always lagging indicators, isn't always leading indicators. Like competency is winning. If you're getting better at competency, which you could argue is a leading indicator or an input at least, then that's great, right? That's really good, right? But if someone comes to me and they want to talk about things that I think is completely disconnected to performance, then I'm just honest with them and I say, look, you probably need to speak to HR about this. This isn't my expertise. But it's hard. But it is hard because you do build a bond, and the trust that you get through coaching means that they feel comfortable coming to you with that stuff. But particularly in enablement, right, where your hours in a day are limited, the amount of initiatives you're juggling is a lot. It's difficult to be the agony aunt for everyone in the business who trusts you and is being coached by you. So yeah, it's a complicated question, but again, the kind of leading thought for me is always performance.
It's really interesting you mentioned that. I had a situation this week at work, and it was I would say for me it was like that, and that was like right on the line almost. Where, so to give you the context, the rep had reached out about doing a role play because they've got a big call coming up next week, and they said to me, "Oh, I want to practice because I'm just really nervous and I'm going into the calls and I'm like this," and I was like, "Wait, stop. It's not what you want. Really, is not the role play, because you've done 100 of these calls. The issue is somewhere before that." Yeah. But it was almost emotional, right? Where it was like, so what's making you nervous, right? When you what does it feel like when you go into calls? Oh, I feel like I'm really tense. I'm like, well, why is that? Are you focused on the outcome? So you're so scared that you're going to not get this to the next stage, or so you're not going to progress it, that it's making you be nervous? Yes. Okay. What is it specifically? So you're almost treading the line, right, between being looking at emotions, but it's exactly to your point, it's only to enhance performance, right? So my thing is, how can, and I've done this with a few reps where I am at the moment, is what do you need to have happen within the first 5 minutes of a call to make you feel comfortable? Yeah. Right? Is it the small talk? Is it the big open question where you can let them ramble so you can just go and compose yourself? But for me, that's about as close to the line as I'll get until emotionally, right? Unless someone breaks their heart in front of you, you've just kind of got to deal with it, right? Yeah. But that's those emotions that actually affect performance, and that's about as close to that line as I would get. I mean, is that similar to what you mean by that sort of?
Yeah, but I mean, the thing I'd say, which is really important, which is where coaches can add a lot of value, is that emotion is downstream from beliefs. So actually, you need to go one step backwards and unpick beliefs. Yeah. So to the point you're making is someone go, well, I'm nervous because this always happens. Okay, what makes you believe that? Well, I don't have any evidence for it. Well, let's look at what you do have evidence for and change the belief first, and then you'll find the emotion changes. So the emotion part is fine because that's natural, right? You whatever it is you do, if you don't have emotions tied to it, then you're not a human being. But you've got to go, you got to go upstream of that, not downstream of that, and actually start tackling belief. And I really enjoy this because you start to, it's uncomfortable because as soon as people start getting to beliefs, you're really challenging their identity, which is hard, right? And you see this go along a lot in sales, where people get an objection and they attack it. It's like, no. You got to understand what's driving this objection, which is often something that they believe, and then you help them realize that belief is untrue, right? It's like arguing with a religious person. It's like, you don't argue with them. You ask them to examine their beliefs, right? Which is fine, like, whatever your differences are in the world. So I quite enjoy those conversations, because when you get to belief, you change emotion, and then ultimately you change behavior, and it goes in that order, right? Which is belief, emotion, behavior, and then outcome. So I just find those really fascinating, and it's good to see I'm not the only one who's getting those types of questions as well.
I actually have a bit of a story about myself when I was first made an account executive, then called business development manager, just because we were different. And I think I'd hit my ramping target 2 months in a row, and I missed my quarterly target by, let's say, 3 deals, or the equivalent of. And I was so stressed out, I actually cried. I thought I was going to get fired. I thought I was going to lose my job. And my then head of sales, who eventually became our CRO, what they did, I think, is an example of actually really good coaching, is they say, obviously, you're not going to get fired. It was, you're only just ramping. And then they provided me with a couple of inbounds to rebuild my confidence about closing deals again, and started building me up gradually. And then actually what it led towards was, they were, that phrase, what would Jesus do? Whenever you're like questioning yourself about doing something, was building that mindset of, okay, what would my head of sales or my then coach ask me when I'm looking at my own pipeline? What questions as a rep should I be challenging myself with? So Aaron, I guess my question to you is, how do you get a rep to start thinking about that by themselves, using the same kind of use cases? How do you get them to challenge them as if you were in the room with them, even when you're not?
By coaching them.
By coaching them.
Yeah, because what coaching does, which is the kind of the unsung hero of what coaching actually does, is that it creates a thinking framework that happens automatically. So I always use this as the example. I personally think it's the best way of articulating it, is that if you were to come to me now, Hector, and say, where are your scissors in your house? I'll turn around to you and say, well, they're in the 3rd drawer down in the kitchen. You'll go and use them, you'll put them back, and you'll never think of it again, right? And that's the kind of directive approach. Whereas if you to come to me and say, where are your scissors? And I say, well, where would you keep them in your house? And you'd be like, well, in the kitchen. I'm like, whereabouts in the kitchen? In the drawers. Which drawer? Well, top drawer's always cutlery, second drawer's always tea towels, and then the 3rd drawer, we've got a kind of miscellaneous thing, right? So, and I said to you, okay, go and have a look, right? So now what I've done is that whatever you're looking for now, replace scissors with it, and I've taught you how to think about something. So you now want to come to me and go, well, where would Aaron keep his nutcracker, as an example? You wouldn't come to me and say, where's your nutcracker? You go, well, where would I keep it? I'd probably keep it in the kitchen, probably 3rd drawer. I'll go and look in there again. So by coaching more and more and more, what you're inadvertently doing, or maybe deliberately doing, and we don't think about it, we don't articulate it enough, is that you're teaching someone a problem-solving framework, how to think, not what to think, or what the right answer to think is. So the more you do that, the more you actually turn that into muscle memory in their brain, where they just automatically now do it. And I still catch myself from my first coach, where I think about something, and then I catch myself following that thinking framework, probably because I'm more aware of it, because I coach so much, that I'm actually a meta to the situation. But I catch myself and I think, actually, I was taught that 15, 16 years ago, and I'm still using it. Because you're teaching people how to problem solve. And that's so powerful. Let me give you one example of the use case of that, where it's really powerful. Every time a rep comes to you and asks you a question, if you answer it, you'll be answering their questions for the rest of their career. You've just lost half a year of your life. Half a year of your life answering questions to someone. Whereas if you follow this framework, they only need to ask you 3 or 4 times, then that's it. You've just got back 6 months of your life, right? That's not valuable for you and the person you're coaching. You might as well go home and start again, because what's the point? So managers don't realize this, is that actually it's not, the short term is painful, the long term is glorious with coaching. It's so powerful. And to your point, you're sitting here regaling a story about what your manager first told you how many years ago. Look at the bond that you've created with them over it. It's phenomenal, right? It's like, it's tear inducing to hear that, because it's so lovely. And if we're not getting that from our employer, what are we getting? What are we getting?
I think
No, sorry. Yeah. Great response.
I think it was Simon Sinek that said it, or summed it up in a nice way, that relationship. It's like, if you ask someone, And I've tried to reframe this when I've been trying to get people to coach. It's like, if I was to ask you to think of a teacher that you had or a coach that you had in your childhood that really believed in you and made a difference in your life, what's that person's name? You know, Mrs. Jones or Coach John, whatever it may be. And you say, and then they go, imagine you could be that person for someone else.
Yeah.
And then they go, oh, amazing. Like, I didn't think of coaching like that or that sort of thing. So I know I don't think any of us are a huge fan of the phrase coaching culture as a catch-all term, but to try and give anyone who listens a bit more practical advice, put yourself in the situation of a head of sales enablement, just started a new organization, right? And your CRO comes to you and goes, we want to create a coaching culture. What's your practical and what's your tactical ways of doing it from day one? You've just been given a mandate. What's your tactical plan to put it in place? And then what's your practical steps for over 3 months or something like that to really get it moving?
Well, the first question I ask is, are you coaching your managers? And what do you think the most common answer is?
Oh, it's not.
No.
By far. They get skipped over routinely, right? Every time.
Well, how do you model the right behavior if you're not even doing it yourself? Look, the thing that we always do at some point, we try and have the conversation early, is we try and turn around to them and say, your managers are doing too much. That's what we try and do. And that's the first awkward conversation we have, is that your managers, even if they wanted to coach at the moment, they probably can't because they're doing too much. And it's a symptom of how bad the management role in sales has become. The average tenure of a sales manager is 19 months. In SaaS, it's 11 months. It's like the gestation period of an elephant. It's like, how can you expect to drive performance? 71% of managers go into the job without any formal training. I mean, and these are the people that are actually driving performance in the organization. But you're happy with them sitting there filling out spreadsheets and reporting on something that you can access yourself. I often say this, is that your managers aren't broken, your CRM's broken. Because if you can't get the information your manager can get, it's not the manager's fault, it's your fault, it's the business's fault, right? So that's the first awkward conversation we have. And there on in, once we've had that conversation, we often do this as well. We say to CROs, we want you to write on a whiteboard, everything that you think your managers are doing. And we get them to write it down. And then we bring their managers in there and we say, we want you to write down what you're doing on your day. And we get them to look at the difference between the two. And you'll be amazed how much that is enlightening to both parties. Because first of all, the manager's going, you didn't even know I'm doing all this stuff. So you don't know how stretched my job is. And then the CRO sitting there going, Christ, you're not focusing your time on important things. You're doing all this crap. How can I clear your plate? And that for me is such an important moment, because it's not about us. It's about the relationship between the manager and the CRO. The other thing is that we try and train managers to say no to their CRO in a nice, respectful way, and let them know why it's a no, or why it's in the kind of Covey matrix, urgent to you, but not important. It's like, you want me to do this now? Okay, well, here's all the things I'm working on. What one thing do you want me to drop to do this? Oh, they're all important. So we just keep adding to managers' plates, and then we wonder why we don't coach. And then once we've done that, we've created that moment of saying, if you're truly dedicated to creating a coaching culture, for anyone listening, I'm doing air quotes because I think it's wanky, then we've got to clear the managers' plates. We have to clear the managers' plates. Yeah. And managers are very grateful for that, but they also are very good at slipping back into bad habits. So it's like, it's convenient when you've got a million one things getting in the way of doing the core part of the job. And reps and managers are guilty of this. So we try and convince them that this isn't getting in the way of the job. This is the job now. So there has to be that moment where the business is backing it and going, we believe actually coaching is the language that we want to adopt. To do that, it's going to take time. To do that, it's going to take bandwidth. So we've got to remove the stuff that's not actually focusing on that. And then again, I think that playbook, and it's a wanky term, but that kind of process that we go about is how that we then do that. But there's no point doing it if there's not an implicit understanding that you need time to do it, you need freedom to do it. And actually, almost as a loose KPI, a manager should be spending 80% of their day doing it. So it's hard. And then the CRAs and senior management have a big responsibility in this, because as I said to you before, coaching is about modeling behavior and modeling a way of thinking. And managers aren't getting coached anymore. Because if you think the managers are busy, you go one layer up, like to second line managers or whatever, or CROs or heads of sales or VPs, and it's like they're busy doing shit that's probably not important as well. And Cianarino summed it up really well, and I love the way he said this. He said, as particularly in SaaS, we've become so obsessed with looking at the scoreboard that we've stopped playing the game. And that's what's happened with managers, is that all they do is look at the scoreboard and no one's playing the game. So imagine that in any other walk of life, where all you're doing is sitting there looking at the numbers, just hoping they go up. You'd be embarrassed, right? But we seem to see it as being acceptable in sales now. So yeah, it's challenging and it's frustrating, and we simply won't work with a business unless they're prepared to make that change, because you just can't do it otherwise.
Do you think it's got worse since pre-COVID? Because I mean, obviously economy's going down, you know, tech layoffs, specifically in the SaaS sector, and even the, let's say, like the golden children of go-to-market SaaS in the world have suffered from it. Do you think those sales managers are actually having their plate filled up more and more, using the analogy of what the CRO thinks they're doing? And then because of that, even though they've got less resources to actually draw upon because their team's potentially smaller, but they've still building up more and more crap that they think is going to improve it, rather than focusing on coaching?
So to the pandemic, no. Sorry, to the pandemic, yes. To the layoffs, no. The layoffs are a symptom of this problem.
Mm-hmm.
To truly understand it, because it's unique to tech, to truly understand it, you've got to follow the money, right? And when you follow the money, it's VC. So VCs put huge amounts of monies into businesses, and then they turn around and go, I want results tomorrow. And then you've got inexperienced founders, co-founders, and they're often product-led founders as well, so they don't really understand sales culture. And then you just get this shitstorm of pressure that rolls downhill, and then it gets put on the managers, and then it gets put on the reps. And then when there's just like pressure of just doing things, you start seeing bad practice. It's because 70% year-on-year growth is unrealistic in any walk of life. Like if you go to traditional markets, they're happy with 10% year-on-year growth, as long as they're getting steady 10% year-on-year growth. So this SaaS model is kind of poisoned the well with everything. It's like, grow at all costs. Grow at the cost of the customer's happiness, grow at the cost of the product being right for the customer, grow at the cost of best practice. It's insanity, right? So when you follow the money, you realize that the model is designed to look at the customer as a wallet and see how quickly can I take the money out of the wallet. And you're going to get malpractice. Well, so you're going to get bad practice and malpractice by doing that. And then you often get no accountability in that process as well, because bad practice is just acceptable. It's like, well, let's just do whatever. It's like, well, who's owning the standards? You know what I mean? It's like, you hear it in SaaS all the time. It's like, it's just so bad. And what worries me is that the traditional markets are looking at SaaS as this big, bright, shiny thing and going, let's start borrowing their model and taking it into it. And you're like, no, you are the maturity curve of where SaaS is heading from. Look at Salesforce. Like, no one's sitting there at Salesforce going, we need 110% growth year on year, because they were the first SaaS company, and now 25 years later, it's like, well, we've dominated the market. We just need steady growth now, right? So it frustrates me, because we look at SaaS and we hold it up as this like beacon of excellence. It's just white noise. It's just crap. The standard of selling in SaaS across the board, which is where most of our customers come from, is so bad. And when you look at the numbers, it's awash with people leaving one SaaS business to go into another one. So you start getting this groundswell of bad practice being passed from business to business to business. I feel really sorry for salespeople within SaaS, because you're on the hamster wheel constantly. No one cares about your development. No one cares about you, as they've proven with all these layoffs. And ultimately, you're just going to be used, or worse, you're going to be taught the worst things and then be given a management role. It's not sustainable. And we're seeing that now, because the arse has dropped out the market of SaaS. Valuations are going down to what they probably should be. And VC are sitting there going, Christ, we're at like apocalyptic proportions of where we're actually at, which is really scary. Now, again, I want to be clear, this isn't every SaaS business, but the model is fundamentally flawed. So I think sorry, I'm bleating on a bit here, but to tackle your second point around the pandemic, is the pandemic created a false economy, particularly within enablement. If anything, it demonstrated how quickly businesses can pivot. And we go to businesses now and say, look, do you see how quickly you pivoted during COVID? Well, imagine how quickly you can pivot during this, where it isn't about a global pandemic. This is decisions that you can make today, right? But particularly in enablement, it created a false economy where a light was shone on enablement, a light was shone on the enablement tech stack. And then it was like, here's an open checkbook, go and make people work from home and make sure that we're measuring everything. And now the chickens are coming home to roost where CROs are going, money's tight, where's the ROI? And enablement is sitting there scratching their head going, I don't know, but we've got these lovely 90-page playbooks. Do you want to see one? So, well, is it generating revenue? We don't know. So there's a big iceberg in the distance for enablement, which is how they prove value. And I'm already seeing some enablement folk being made redundant because, you know, if you're not demonstrating clear value and actually hitting bottom line and revenue in the current climate, you're not needed. Like, as horrible as it is to say, but you're simply a luxury.
You made a lot of great points there, and I think one of the main things for me around the whole SaaS bubble was considering these people, a lot of these VC people and the investors and stuff, they make their money and make their living through like maths and science and stuff like that. The math just doesn't math when it comes to these growth plans, right? And or even the problem or the way that they look to solve that problem. For example, to put it back to more like enablement and coaching and stuff like that. Like the only plan was, if we hire an AE, they would give us 300 grand in return on investment based on each head count. So we need 3 million, we'll hire 10. Well, it doesn't work like that because not everyone ramps up at the same time. You're not coaching them, you're not onboarding them, you're not supporting them. But like you say, every single or not every single company, but the vast majority seem to try and solve the problem the same way, which means everyone runs into the same issue, which just doesn't make any sense. And then to the point on the enablement side, I think enablement, absolutely, now you're either seen as a cost center or a strategic consultant internally, right? And that's how it should be. But I think, and this is something we've spoken to a couple of other guests about, is around what do we own, what do we influence as enablement, right? Because an awful lot of the time we're dictated to, and it's up to us to have the internal stakeholder relationships and stuff like that. But there's no, whether you use the sales velocity equation, whether you use whatever metric, like you say, if you're not doing if you look at the sales velocity equation, people go, that's great. That's still a sales thing. Like, you need to take it a step back to make it enablement friendly. Right, okay, so if we want more opportunities, what are the competencies? Who are doing it? Yeah, what training programs we're putting in? What teaching? What coaching? Who's responsible for it? What's the metric that we need to move? Is it 2%, 10%, 5%? Whatever it is, only now, because that light has been shone in enablement, is that, like you say, are those questions being asked consistently, right? Yeah. So no, I think you made a lot of great points there. It was great.
It's a victim of its own opacity. That's the problem with enablement. Yep. If you grab 5 people from any business and say, what's enablement? They'd struggle to really define it, or certainly come up with a unified description of it. And I think part of it is that enablement is such a spectrum, right? You've got like kind of front end and back end enablement, where it's like in the back end, people are building everything, right? And the front end, people are delivering everything. And the quicker you can define what the metrics are along that journey of front end and back end, the quicker you can actually see the value. But the biggest problem they have is that they're not tying it to strategic goals the business has. And I envision that enablement is going to move further up the organization and sit like lockstep with strategy if it's not already. And I've seen this trend over the last 5 years, and I called it out about 10 years ago. And everyone thought I was mad. They're like, I should report to the CRO. It's like, well, we're marking our own homework then, right? It's like, it doesn't make any sense. It should be sitting next to strategy, and it should be involved in those conversations of saying, here's what the business is trying to achieve. Here's how we trickle it down for the organization. Here's how we bring together product marketing, product sales, and the various other different departments, and we become a lens and a conduit towards those objectives. And if you're telling me you can't tie a metric to that, then where's your value? Do you know what I mean? Like, where is your value? So yeah, it's interesting. It's very, very interesting.
Do you think, to use an analogy of this is very American, I know we're all English, people only remember who wins the Super Bowl. No one really talks about the team that lost or the team that came third. So with that in mind, do you think it's the same with enablement? Like, enablement only when you achieve those key core business metrics and the CRO goes, well done guys, you absolutely smashed it. Whereas if they don't hit those metrics, then you're like second, third, and you're just forgotten about and are used as a scapegoat, let's say, of the organization. Yeah,
but that's okay if we are being used as a scapegoat, because we've not protected ourselves in that journey, right? So no, it's not okay, but we've got to accept that, right? If we're gonna hide behind smoke and mirrors, and it's when it suits us, you know, it's the good news, bad news thing, right? You should deliver good news and bad news in exactly the same way. because, you know, you just have to, right? It's the same with enablement. It's like where enablement goes wrong is that they haven't put the structure in place to begin with. So then you test through growth. So if I was to go and work for a business, if I was going to start my own business now and I was in SaaS, it's really simple. Do we have the right language of pipeline? Do we have the right language of people? And do we have the right processes in place? Forget about Series A, forget about Series B, forget about Series C. If we were a business now that was post-IPO, could we plug 300 people into this machine and know that it works? Or can we plug 2 people into this machine and know that it works? If you haven't got that in place and you're building enablement programs in lieu of that, it's destined to fail. So where the challenge is when we go into businesses, we have to unpick the stuff that they've done because it's just not fit for purpose. So if you're making a strategic enablement hire, you've got to be patient. The objective is to get the sausage machine, not the sausage. Don't go and write playbooks when you haven't even put in there a sales process. What's the point, right? Or your team's not been trained on the sales process. People aren't following the sales process. Don't go and build like coaching videos and training videos if you don't have a competency framework, because what competencies you're even working on. So we encourage businesses to take a step back, get off the hamster wheel, hit the brakes and go and build the foundations. And then once you've built the foundations, you can plug any amount into it and you know that it works. If not, it's just a leaky bucket. You can keep pouring more water in there, but you're just increasing the chance of it not working. To Kieran's point, it's like the point you made before about growth through people. It's not a linear relationship between people and revenue, because you've often not got the things in place to make it a linear relationship. Like, you know, your recruitment shit. Well, great, go and plug 300 shit candidates into a product, into a sales organization. Or your competency framework shit. Okay, great. So you're not coaching people on the right things and we're surprised they're not getting better. Or your managers are shit. So we're surprised that everyone's leaving. They're going to work for the competitor and we're losing good and bad people. Or you haven't got the processes in place. So everyone's doing their own thing and it's like the Wild West. We can't report on it. We can't forecast. So you've got to get the foundations in place first before you do it. And if enablement are getting blamed for that, it's like, well, yeah, because you haven't got the foundations in place. You should have called this out earlier. You've got to panic early in enablement. That's the rule. Panic early. At least you've called where the icebergs are in that distance. Sorry, a bit of a rant.
That's all good. That's why we got you on, Aaron, just so you can rant. Aaron, almost made it the whole way through.
You're getting there.
I just wanted to find, I suppose, my final thing that I just wanted to touch on, and I think it's something that you posted on LinkedIn fairly recently, which was around trust, because obviously trust, and I believe you called it the trust equation, right? But I think the difference, one of the main differences between feedback and coaching is the trust element, right? And whether someone's going to listen to that feedback and turn it into coaching, because you get feedback all the time. Like if you're walking down the street or you're driving, you get quick, you know, you maybe you're going too fast or you pull out too quickly, you get fairly immediate feedback in the form of a middle finger or a horn, right? But you get feedback fairly consistently, but it's not coaching. But I would say the number one thing, between the differentiator between those is that trust. So in terms of the trust equation, as you called it, or I suppose my quick, like defining what that means for you, but then how do you scale that trust in the team, and how do you do that? Is it possible to scale it only team by team, coach by coach, or is scaling trust something you can do across an organization?
Well, the first thing to do is label it, and that's what I love about the trust equation. And it's not mine; it's David Maister's book. David Maister and I can't remember the co-author, and the brilliant book, The Trusted Advisor, in 2001, I think it was, or 2000, is that trust is like, it's so ambiguous what it means, and it could mean anything to anyone, right? I mean, why do you trust someone? What the trust equation does is it breaks down the constituent parts of trust and forces the behavior in the coach to demonstrate those behaviors or care about those behaviors. And it's credibility, reliability, intimacy over self-orientation. So self-orientation is the only denominator that needs to be low. Like you've got to have low self-orientation. It's not about you. You're not the hero of this story. It's about the person that you're coaching. So credibility one, right? I mean, it's so simple. Can you do the job? So you're coaching someone and then thinking, you can't even do this. So there's reliability. You keep moving our coaching sessions. Every time I come down and sit with you, you've got something more important than me to do that, right? So do you show up for the thing? Like, are you reliable in that process? And then intimacy, like, do you really understand me? Like, are you making the effort to try and understand me? Are you vulnerable with me, like as the person who's being coached? Because that's going to build intimacy as well. And then lastly, that low self-orientation is that, are you doing this because you care about me hitting the target? Are you doing about this because you're trying to enable me to be better? So if you can demonstrate those behaviors throughout the trust equation, then yeah, you can do it. But again, like, it's all very well one person doing that, but you've got to teach the organization about that. And that's how you scale trust. And you've got to be really mindful of it as well, is that innocuous things to you can mean a lot to the person that you're coaching. And I had an example earlier this week where someone felt like I'd knocked their confidence, and I did knock their confidence, actually, because the outcome was that I knocked their confidence. And I had to sit down with them and say, look, we're aiming for excellence, right? So there's a choice. You can meet me there, or I can drag you there to excellence. And this is your choice. So along this journey, yeah, you probably will leave there and feel like I'm inadequate, but that's okay, because you now know where you're going wrong. It's now a conscious incompetence, right? So we still make mistakes in that journey, but innocuous things can really affect the trust in a relationship, not just coaches, but customers, friends, family, other halves, right? So what I love about the trust equation is that it labels it. And when you label it, you can start being conscious of the behavior. But scaling trust is about first understanding what it is, and then actually, walking the walk as well as talking the talk. We've all had managers that we don't trust, and it's often because they're low on one of those constituent parts of the trust equation.
Aaron, so many amazing takeaways there, and I just wanted to ask you finally, where can people find you if they're looking to find more about Flowstate with yourself?
Yeah, sure. So as you alluded to at the beginning of this, I'm really active on LinkedIn. So and I hope it comes across, but like, me and my co-founder, we're passionate about sales. We really love it. And I suppose, like, by proxy, we're passionate about enablement, right? So we give away the cow with the milk. So on LinkedIn, we give tips, we give opinions, we give frameworks, we give as much away as we can. So follow me on LinkedIn, it's Aaron Evans, or Aaron Evans Enablement, pretty easy to recognize, as you can see from my long hair and my chubby jowls. There's flowstate.co, it's flowstatesales.co.uk, or follow the Flowstate page on LinkedIn, where we post loads of videos and loads of content and interviews that we do with people as well. I've got my own podcast, which is Selling with Flow, where we interview luminaries from the world of sales. The latest one is with Daniel Pink, the author of The Power of Regret, Drive, and obviously more pertinently, To Sell is Human. And yeah, like, just look, we love interacting with people who are as passionate as we are about sales, who have questions. So just get in touch, drop me a message, and I always reply in time, but I do always reply.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for joining us. And as always, tune in next week for another episode of Enablement Involved. And thanks so much, Kieran, as well.